All right, Ken, if you would introduce yourself, state your party affiliation, your district, and for people watching on their computers, please describe the geographic boundaries of your district.
Sure. So my name's Ken Helm. I represent House District 27. House District 27 is centered now on downtown Beaverton and reaches to the north to St. Vincent's Hospital and the neighborhood of West Haven behind it. To the south, almost to Sexton Mountain. And then it includes the neighborhoods of Cedar Hills and Cedar Mill, parts of them. And to the west, probably the closest, and the boundaries go in and out, but it would be Murray Boulevard. And to the east, right close to where I live, which is Beaverton Hillsdale Highway near Jesuit High School.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself, just a brief biography.
Grew up in Bend and went to undergrad at Willamette, followed by a couple of years of figuring out what I wanted to do. And since I didn't know what I wanted to do, I went to law school. I wanted to actually go to law school because those were the years that we were trying hard to get past over-harvesting in our national forests. And I thought that I wanted to go and protect the forests. I found out that federal civil law is really boring, and those statutes are really boring. And I changed directions and went into land use.
You went for the excitement.
Well, so all those different strokes for different folks, kind of ideas.
Okay.
Land use really suited me because of the nexus of local politics and the law. And you probably know that Oregon's land use protection system is probably the best in the United States, and so it was unique and interesting. And it allowed me access into it pretty early. And I spent my legal career in land use in all phases. I've done developer side work, opponent side work, government work, and I ended up as a hearings officer for local governments, writing legal opinions that were supposed to hold up to appellate review if they were appealed.
So those hearings officer decisions are appealed directly to the Court of Appeals?
They first would be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, and thereafter directly to the, so there's no circuit court involvement.
Yeah. How many years did you do those?
I believe my first stint was maybe in 2007, and then I wrapped it up at the end of 2015 after my first session. Mm-hmm. I felt like I was already running into at least perceived conflicts of interest, stuff that I was gonna hear, rule on, and it was gonna come to the legislature.
Mm-hmm. So have you practiced law since then?
No.
And because you thought it would be a conflict of interest? So you were able to survive on a legislator's salary?
Yeah, the plain answer is yes, and I am lucky, and we might want to talk about that later since there's a ballot measure.
Yeah.
But I have a kind of unique set of circumstances that have allowed me to serve. I need that salary, but I don't need what I would have needed when I was a younger person.
Mm-hmm. So you buy a lot of lottery tickets at that place in Beaverton that always has the winners, right?
I don't know where it is.
Okay, so tell us, this will be what, 6 for you? How many?
Yes, that's right, 6.
So tell us what you did in your 5th term that merits your constituents bringing you back. What bill or issue would you like to highlight that shows your value to your constituents?
So I never miss a chance to explain that I, like my colleagues, specialize. Mm-hmm. So obviously I'm going to do the land use stuff. I'm the chair of the land use committee. That committee does ag work, land use, water, and natural resources. And so I have worked really hard on water issues since I started chairing the Energy and Environment Committee, which included water at that time, and I think I started that in 2017. It was my first full session doing that. And 2023 ended up being the biggest session for water in 20 years. We created a package along with my Republican counterpart, Mark Owens. We created a package of both policy suggestions and appropriations that was designed to make the state more resilient against long-term drought. And we ended up, the total package was about $500 million when you added everything up. Part of that was local water infrastructure that was granted both through our efforts and the efforts of representatives asking for their district. And in terms of, you know, bringing home the bacon for my constituents, that's where a few things occurred that I
So
can point
that
to.
$500 million package passed.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and of course you represent all Oregonians, so give us a couple of the highlights in that package, whether they're in your district or Representative Owens' part of the state, or a couple of things that really matter in that package.
I'll point out a couple of things that are important in the overall water world because it'll lay the foundation for maybe something we'll talk about for 25. And that is, we think we're resilient against drought. We think we manage water well, and we don't. We haven't done either one of those things well enough to be ready for the next 50 years. So one of the really important things we've done is allocate funding toward data gathering and data refinement, and to launch an initiative to try to eventually get all water data, whether it's water quality or water quantity, in the same place and in an understandable method so that both the state agencies and the practitioners can use it.
So the New York Times had this huge series, I'm sure you read, about the depletion of aquifers around the country and the fact that most places don't know how much is in their aquifer and then the rate that they're pulling it out. Is that what we're talking about here?
In part, yeah. So this will be a database that has as much surface water information as we can get, which includes state monitoring gauges and some information from users of water that are required to measure. And then for groundwater, yes, we've got some state monitoring wells, but it is astonishing how little we know about our aquifers. We know now, we have a good idea of the aquifer in Harney County that underlies most of that, Harney and Malheur. We have a good idea of what underlies Deschutes, Jefferson, part of Crook, the Deschutes aquifer. And we know quite a bit about the Umatilla aquifer. But the rest of the state, we are walking in the dark. As far
So we don't know much about the Willamette Valley?
No.
Oh. Why is that?
We just haven't had resources. And until probably, well, maybe 20 years ago, but certainly since climate change has really reared its head, and since 2010, say, our water masters have been able to satisfy all the needs pretty much by kind of local knowledge and looking. So if it's surface water, they can see it. If it's groundwater, only rarely would you have wells go dry, domestic wells. Commercial agriculture wells are really deep, and they're typically in a different aquifer than drinking water. But we started having people's domestic wells going dry in the Deschutes and the Klamath, starting probably back when I entered the legislature, and that has continued. And so that really, it points to a couple of things. It points out the dynamics that sometimes occurs between surface water and groundwater, and just that those aquifers, the shallow ones that rely on primarily on precipitation, and most of them do, they're really vulnerable. So that's one of the, that is in the nature of things.
Mm-hmm.
We could have a whole conversation about what the package did, and it would test my memory to get the details. But we tried to do sound policy and forward-thinking investment in 3 areas: ag, fish, and families. So fish, farm, and families. So we got some domestic water issues for families. For fish, we did stuff like fish passage and habitat. And then for ag, we did a lot of monitoring and planning for the future.
Well, so $500 million, that's a lot of data gathering. So I'm assuming that we're also talking about things like culverts or covering irrigation channels, or what else?
So yes on the fish passage. The idea of putting solar panels over the top of ag ditches would be the irrigation districts.
Okay.
We're not quite there yet, and they haven't come recently to ask for money to do that. But that points out another huge positive expenditure in that package was the irrigation and district modernization money. That was about $50 million.
Okay.
Super smart, because all of it was designed to help irrigation districts reduce their lack of efficiency. The big canals, they leak water like crazy, which isn't a problem if it goes down to the Resco Aquifer. But what it means is the water isn't where it needs to be in the watershed when it needs to be there. You're typically you're taking too much from the upper watershed in the early season, and there's not enough at the end. So we designed that investment so that the $50 million could be our state and local match for federal money, which was already there, either through NCRS money, ag bill programs called PL 566 is the code name, and Senator Merkley did a lot of work earlier to get that fund rehabilitated. Those matches are 4-to-1, so we're quadrupling our money.
Okay. What didn't you? I know that I watched a couple of hearings. I know you and Representative Owens spent a tremendous amount of time on that. What didn't you get that you're going to come back for, or what didn't you get that left you disappointed in that package?
What we could have probably used double the money.
Okay.
The disinvestment in our water-related natural resource agencies over the last 25 to 30 years is significant. And so those would be agencies like Fish and Wildlife, Water Resources, DEQ. We're expecting those agencies to work miracles with almost no money. And we're going to try to do it again in 25 because we just don't have the budget. And so in addition to needing more of the same, we do need to get to some policy and statutory changes that make the system work better. I'd say we are still stuck in a regulatory mentality when it comes to managing water. And Rep. Owens and I are overtly trying to change that attitude to a management strategy. And that requires in-depth study of basins. There's about 18
could you
basins.
define? I haven't heard anybody make that comparison. What's the difference between a regulatory mentality and a management mentality?
the regulatory mentality is what we have under the prior appropriation doctrine, which is the way we manage water in the West, which is not managing it. It is allocate, 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 allocate until you figure out there's no more water.
So it's
and then
the,
you start
it's the,
turning
just the
out.
historical water rights and,
Mhm.
and so.
You give it out until there's a crisis, and then you try to reel it back in, and that means you allow two things happen. One, you starve rivers for water that fish and wildlife need. They literally go dry. And from the agriculture point of view, you tell junior water right holders, oh, everything's fine until it's not.
Mhm.
And then one day your water gets turned off, regulated off is the term they use. And then what do? And it's not a system in which there's shared pain. It's not everybody takes a hit. A lot of places, although in irrigation districts they can do it that way. But just up and down a river, the folks that have the most junior rights just get turned off. So that we didn't tackle trying to change prior appropriation because that's a third rail of politics in the western half of the third of the country. And so, but what we did say is our agency has to not tell itself that our only job is to turn off water when it has to get ready to manage with information first, better tools, and an attitude that is a partner with all the different entities that need water around the state, including in-stream.
So a lot of states to our east have been dealing with Colorado River and with other issues in states that don't have as much water as we do. Is the legal term prior appropriation? That's what you said. So have they begun overturning that in other states, or is it?
Not to my knowledge.
Uh-huh.
Colorado, we often look to Colorado for the most creative legal workarounds.
Okay.
The problem for changing the prior appropriation doctrine in a wholesale way is it would look like taking a property right away.
Right.
And it's not a real property right. It's a use right, and I won't pull the legal term out on you, but what that triggers in a lot of folks who get really worked up about their water is a constitutional takings claim, and no state has wanted to weather that.
Right.
If they lose, it's really expensive, and if the route to winning is a super long one and expensive one.
Okay. We could talk all day about water. It's fascinating. Let me ask you about a bill you and I briefly, I think, discussed. That was a bill that came in the short session, and the goal was to speed up the siting of solar facilities and possibly wind on BLM land. Do you remember that bill?
I do.
So there seems to be, and I subsequently spent a lot of time talking to Jake about that and other issues, there seems to be a real tension between the need to meet our climate goals by siting wind and solar particularly, and the long-held desire to protect the environment as well. And it seems like your committee is probably going to be in the middle of that again, right?
Part of it, the land use side, yeah.
So and I think BLM just come out recently and say they have changed some things. So I don't want to speak in code here for people who may be watching this. Can you frame the issue for us and tell us how you're thinking about it right now and what's likely to come up in 25?
So the bill we're talking about proposed on federal lands where wind and solar might be located that had already gone through a National Environmental Policy Act analysis, that we wouldn't, after that, send the proposal to the Energy Facility Siting Council.
Right.
And I think we almost made it. We had a lot of understanding that it would, that analysis at FSEC would be partially duplicative, although our own Department of Energy would disagree with what I just said. And one of the reasons to do that is that there's a lot of well-earned criticism of FSEC being slow and expensive at a time, like you just said, that we want renewable energy faster. We say we want it in the state. So that, and so it wasn't a great short session bill. There's some complexity. I expect it to come back, and we can have a good talk about it then, and determine how rigorous, I guess, we want to be. But what you point out is exactly right, and it used to frustrate the dickens out of me, and now I'm just philosophically amused because Oregonians want two partially disconnected or at odds desires at the same time. It's just like housing. We want tight UGBs, but we want low housing prices, and we want housing at types and price ranges all across the board. Those are partially incompatible desires, and it is sort of immature of us to not tackle the contradiction directly. And so, same thing. I have tried for session after session to get folks behind an amendment to statewide planning goal 13, which deals with energy resources, to get some agreement on where it would be appropriate to fast track wind and solar siting, mostly on the east side, because that's where our good resources are. And out of one side of folks' mouths, they say, "Oh yeah, we really want renewable energy. We want green energy. We want a blue-green alliance to build it. And we want a just transition and unionized labor to build all this good stuff. But but you can't put it anywhere. You can't put it here. You can't put it there." We just experienced the feds back out of the leasing for offshore wind, which they literally call the Saudi Arabia of wind energy. Why? Because we can't make up our minds. And the folks down in Southern Oregon will say the feds came in too hot and heavy and fumbled it when they didn't need to. But it's the same issue. The tribes and our fishermen haven't been convinced that their resources won't be harmed, so they don't want it.
Right.
And on the other side, we're just not able to face the trade-offs. And it's the same in the desert on the east side.
Yep. So how you said you want to come right at that more directly. So how do you do that? How do you have these hard conversations, whether it's offshore wind or east side solar and wind?
I would leave. Let's leave aside offshore wind for the time being,
because it's too far in the future.
Yeah, and it's more complicated, and there are international companies that need to get those leases because nobody else knows how to do it.
Yeah.
So there's a separate problem. On the east side, one of the biggest problems, and we may have just gotten over there's some rulemaking that occurred this summer. We may have made some progress. But a lot of our folks that participate in advocacy and policy making simply do not know what this state looks like. They don't know how big it is. They don't know how many hours it takes you to drive from the crest of the Cascades to Idaho, or from the Columbia to the California border. And it is an immense state that I have done, and I've driven my fair share of those miles. I'm very proud of knowing a lot of what the state looks like. There is just a ton of land out there that is low value for agriculture. It's low value for wildlife habitat. And the snarl we get ourselves in is to forget that there is abundant land available It all has to be, by the way, if you want to build a financially viable solar array, it has to be within 10 miles of major transmission. It can't, we can't cover the desert with.
Yeah.
And so we start dealing, in the discussions, we start dealing in the abstract. And people start pulling out numbers that they don't understand, like millions of acres. Well, get your calculator out and see how many square miles that is. Why don't you look at how many square miles compose Eastern Oregon and find out what a tiny percentage that is. Start getting some information that helps you box in the trade-off we're going to have to make, and not assume that it's all or nothing.
So that's pretty interesting. So we're talking about Portland lobbyists or people who don't leave the Willamette Valley.
And my colleagues.
Yeah.
I have encouraged my colleagues, the Portland contingent. You're invited to go out into the rest of the state all the time. Go, see it, drive end to end, and you'll start to understand better.
Like the Transportation Commission has been doing this year.
It's a very good practice, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I think you already answered this question, but a question we always ask you is show us that you're not just a party line, in your case Democrat, or if your opponent were here a Republican. You could probably just say, look, I worked with Owens on this for all session last session. But I'll offer you a chance to give me another example of how you're not just a party line Democrat.
I'm not going to try too hard to contradict what you just said. I think if you looked at my record and Tina Kotek's record, you'd find a huge overlap. And that's part of keeping your job, being effective within your caucus. And so I don't know that I need to point to a bill where I went crossways with my party. Where I think it shows up more, and I'm really proud of the partnership that Rep. Owens and I have, because it's allowed concepts and changes to occur that if I had tried to bring them myself as just a lone Democrat, would never have happened. And I think those are the things that they're hard to see because they don't just show up in a vote.
Can you give an example of one of those concepts or changes that?
Yeah, my favorite one occurred in this 23 session, and Rep. Owens and I share the opinion that you can't manage water without measuring it, and it's no sense measuring it unless the department has the data. So that's called reporting. We theoretically require measurement of a lot of water rights, particularly the newer water rights. By newer, I mean after 1909. And the older water rights are not conditioned to measure or report. And those are the ones that hold the largest amount of water. So it's always been controversial, and there's always been a stone wall if you said, we want you to measure and we want you to report, even if it's just once a year. And we had been round and round with advocates trying to get something done. And in 23, he and I finally just said, you want to hate us, fine. We're going to give the Water Resources Commission the authority to require you to report. And they can decide where it's needed.
Report usage?
Yeah. So that's something that I tried before and got smacked down. And we will be talking about taking that issue to the next level, which is to require reporting, not just leave it at the Water Resources Commission.
Okay. What are your other committee assignments? I know that's the bulk of your work.
My other committee assignments, what are we calling it? Climate, Energy, and Environment. and housing. And the reason that I think I suggested to the speaker before the 23 session that he might want to put me on housing because we were going to deal with some land use issues, and he did, and so I'm still there.
And do you think the legislature and the governor have done enough to promote the increased production of housing, or is there something that you would point to and say, if we come back and do X in 25, we can really get the machine cranked up?
What I'm worried about at the moment is overshooting yearly targets, as surprising as that might sound.
You're worried that we're going to build too fast?
That we may have put too much state money into housing, and that our expectations of local governments are too high. I'm kind of in the mode, we did a lot in 23, 24. A lot. The Oregon Housing Needs Analysis is a huge enterprise, and it's going to take maybe 5-6 years to come to fruition. We do want to build. We put a lot of money in sort of government-funded housing, and I worry about where the incentives are for market-based housing, because it's not sustainable for the government to keep pumping money into housing. We can't reach the scale we need to. We need to harness the free market there, and it's ready. So those folks can make their own case. What I worry about most isn't whether the home builders are right or the housing advocates that want more state money are right. It's what happens in the planning department at the local level, where Junction City comes and says, great, we can't spend this money because we can't get planners, or our planning staff is overwhelmed. That's the reality, and that's the chokehold. So I kind of think it would be nice to let it sit. Let's see. You had a great metaphor there of revving the engine. Let's let it rev up. It ain't there yet.
Okay. Great. Well, we have one fun question for you, which is, the question we always ask at the end. What were you known for in high school? What were you best known for in high school?
Well, my favorite answer, I think, would be that I was one of the top pole vaulters in the state.
Well, what was your personal record?
I think in high school, 13 feet 9 inches. So I was a Lake Wobegon pole vaulter, so above average. But I was really into it, and I think people recognize that. Nice.
How many high schools were there in Bend when you graduated?
So I started out, I think Mountain View was the only other. And I can't quite remember whether it came online while I was in school. It was brand new.
Well, it's in a different town.
Yeah.
Feels like a little bit like Santa Monica down there now.
My parents still live there, so I've watched it grow and change, and there's a lot of things that are way better.
Yeah.
But boy, it's a lot of people doing a lot of things all the time. It's kind of hard to navigate anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thank you both.
I had a couple of quick questions.